More sanctions.
Who? Where?
Sanction everybody.
Everyone, exactly.
Everybody needs to be sanctioned. Everybody who I don't like.
Italy. Sanctioned Italy. They voted wrong.
Yeah.
It was some hell of a week, wasn't it? Meloni in Italy winning bigly, as Trump might say. Someone, who knows who, blows up NordStream pipelines.
It's a mystery. We need frickin' Poirot to figure that one out for us. We need a 2-hour Poirot movie.
Come on, Joe. Laws of objective journalism. We have to start with the premise that we don't know.
Exactly.
Right.
So we need Poirot.
Yeah.
Sherlock Holmes.
Then Russia, of course, formally annexes 4 regions of Ukraine, and Putin delivers this speech for the ages.
Mm-hmm.
Among other things. You know, something we didn't cover last week as well was the protests going on in Iran.
Mm.
I thought, well, maybe it'll just die down. It hasn't. It's still going on, but maybe we can touch on that this week as well. Where do you want to start?
When did they blow up the pipelines?
Tuesday? 27th.
27th. Yeah. It's funny, no?
It's funny. Yeah, from a very certain perspective. It's funny. It's not funny for Europe.
Apparently they're all quite happy now. Settled a kind of an enduring problem amongst the Europeans. You know, it was.
Now they can put to bed any kind of doubts they might have had about aligning with Washington.
Yeah. They can just relax, or at least, well, put to bed any doubts that Germany might turncoat and in its own national interest, and like in the sense of, you know, keeping its industry going and, you know, the lights on over the next few winters. That Germany might have decided to maybe accept a little bit of Russian gas. And that obviously spooked other European nations, because, like, if Germany did that, then you might have France following suit, and obviously it spooked Washington. So, and it was a bit of a wedge in a certain sense amongst the Atlanticist nations, the NATO nations. So it was a source of anxiety, unease, sleepless nights. But now,
and of course Russian influence.
Yeah, but now there's no problem anymore. Everybody's relaxed. Everybody's calm now. They're secure beneath the watchful eyes
of London and Washington.
They can relax. There's no more dilemma.
Yeah.
Now they know that German industry is going to have to shut down partially this winter, and Germans and some other Europeans are going to freeze a little bit.
Partly this winter.
The wave has collapsed.
Let's cut straight to the chase. You looked at the kind of infrastructure of this thing and what it took to do what happened. Leaping ahead to the conclusion, do you think it's rebuildable, or is that it?
It is rebuildable for sure, yeah.
Does it require a whole new line, or can that section be fixed?
They do that all the time. They basically...
repair sections.
Repair sections, yeah.
So it's not actually
deep.
permanent.
It's not deep. It's like, I think the area is actually 200 feet of water, which, you know, obviously...
The sea is shallow.
Yeah. So, you know, the pressure down there isn't too bad and all that kind of stuff. So you can get divers down there or whatever for welding it. You cut out the damaged sections and weld in new sections. And then there's something.
Did you find that it's submerged under the seabed, though? And encased in concrete?
Well, it's on the seabed. It's not submerged. It's on the seabed, because it has to be on the seabed for repairs and stuff, right? But it's encased in concrete in like 3. How much was it? A few inches anyway of reinforced concrete, steel reinforced concrete, and the metal pipes themselves are about 4 centimeters, about 1.5 inches of steel. So, but you know, it's easily done, and there's a kind of device. I think they call it a pig or something like that, a pipeline pig or something like that they can push through it to push out the seawater. You know, so seawater gets dumped out. Once you repair them, any seawater in there, you start from one end and push it through. Probably like a bong, basically, that pushes through the pipeline and pushes out the seawater, push it out the far end, and then it's good to go. But it's not going to happen, obviously, right?
Right. So it is doable. This is not as permanent as...
No, that's like we've been saying so often.
So you were speaking kind of tongue-in-cheek, where okay, good, this settles an issue for us. That's put to bed.
It's put to bed in the sense that
They can opt. They can go. America's given them the option of going with that political choice, but the political choice, in actuality, is still available for them to rebuild it and patch up the hurt. With
yeah, but
Russia.
nobody's going to do that because
Right.
they'll blow it up again.
Right. Well, the precedent's set.
And yes, not only set a precedent for that pipeline, but for other pipelines and other energy infrastructure is now technically it's fair game, right? It's fair.
Right.
It's open season
Right.
on anybody's energy infrastructure, right? That's America has introduced that now as an allowable or a you know fair play basically fair game.
And if it was a test, so to speak, in the sense that, well, what would the fallout? What will the political reaction be? Every government in Europe went, "Oh, we don't know who did it. Well, we'll just have to have an investigation." Or they went, "Russia did it."
Hmm.
So the test was successful. They now have open season on blowing up anything Russian. There was an interesting item that occurred 4 days before that was only reported in Russian media. Well, of course, it was the Russian government reporting it. So inevitably, it was only Russian media. But it was that the FSB claimed they'd foiled an effort to sabotage the TurkStream pipeline, using in part, of course, Ukrainian services, but between the lines, Western ones too. That occurs 4 days prior to this.
Yes.
So maybe this was meant to be a twofer. Who knows?
Well, there's obviously I'm sure people have seen it already, but there's lots of hard evidence of American and allied activity around the area of where the pipelines were blown up very recently within the last month, basically in September. This one, of course, you won't see this talked about at all in the Western media, but it comes from other state media organizations. This one's from where is I don't know where Al Mayadeen is. Is that it's .net.
Saudi, I think.
It's Saudi, yeah. Anyway, so U.S. military aircraft were circling NordStream incident site in September. U.S. military reportedly carried out sorties over the future site of the NordStream pipeline incident in the Baltic Sea. So habitually and on numerous occasions circled for hours over the site of the Nord Stream pipeline incident near Bornholm Island early in September. This is from Flight Radar 24. So Flight Radar is a flight tracking, commercial and military and any other flights that show up with transponders and people on there. And I think it was confirmed by the company, the Flight Radar website, that you can go back and look at the activity, and they saw U.S. Navy Sikorsky Seahawk helicopters spending hours loitering over the location for several days in a row, September 1st, 2nd and 3rd. So there's that one, but then you go back in time, actually, and this is like a website, Pipeline Technology Journal, for people who are into pipeline technology. You can follow, keep up to date on pipeline technology. Some people are into that. It's pretty interesting, actually. Pretty awesome technology. Anyway, this is from 2015, 13th of November, I think. 13th of November 2015. Swedish military had to clear a remotely operated vehicle, a drone, rigged with explosives, found near the line 2 of the Nord Stream natural gas offshore pipeline system. Discovered during a routine survey operation as part of the annual integrity assessment of the Nord Stream pipeline. So somebody's been messing around with this idea for quite a long time. Of course, America was against Nord Stream.
About that story, the source below is actually RT. RT reported it, but they indeed were citing Swedish authorities. You see the workaround there. What I would like to make a point out here is that Russian media reported it, and we therefore have a track record of this occurring before. So why would Western media not have drawn attention to that at the time? If it's Russia snooping around its own pipelines with underwater drones laden with explosives. So the only reason we know about a past track record and contextual evidence is because of Russian media, i.e. it's not in their interest to do this. So.
No, of course. Anyone with any sense knows, but you're not allowed to say it in Western media. It's because
We don't-
ideologically, it's against the dominant discourse, and you gotta stick with the script, not mention it. And
That's past form of a drone snooping in the area.
Well,
There's also exercises.
yeah,
The
exactly.
US military's been all over the area.
Yeah, what they call it,
From
ball tops.
Ball tops from June to July this year. US Sixth
Yes.
Fleet. Exercise
Just show you
simulating mine
Oh, yeah, that's it.
demining. Not the pipeline, but
Mine hunting capabilities, yeah.
Yeah.
Is it here? Ball top 22. So this is published. This is NATO website. Ball top 22. Perfect opportunity for research and testing new technology. Remember that term, a perfect opportunity. Anyway, a significant focus of ball tops every year is the demonstration of NATO mine hunting capabilities. And this year, the U.S. Navy continues to use the exercise as an opportunity to test emerging technology. So yeah, I mean, we don't need to really go through. I don't think it says there. On the second paragraph, experimentation was conducted off the coast of Bornholm, Denmark, which is pretty much where the pipeline blew up. So they were doing this in. Someone was
those sneaky Russians.
Someone back in 2015 was testing out a drone with explosives near the pipeline. In June this year, the U.S. Navy's Sixth Fleet was conducting exercises with drone technology to see what they could do with drones around pipelines right in the area of where the pipeline was blown up this week. And then about a month ago, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of September, US Navy military helicopters were seen circling for hours over the exact area where the bomb. But, Neil, I still ask the question, who do you think did it?
Russia.
Okay. Glad to see you're thinking straight on this one. So, yeah, well, a few questions on that then. Why did they go all the way, like literally thousands of kilometers along the pipeline into NATO, effectively NATO country-controlled area technology? And like that area there's all sorts of NATO country and American sensors undersea, because you remember over the past few years, scares in Baltic countries and Sweden and stuff and Norway about Russian submarines being spotted. Do you remember those news articles?
Yeah.
So they have a lot of undersea sensors to detect drones, submarines, all sorts of stuff, right? That have been there for quite a long time, particularly in that area around the Baltic countries' territorial waters. So, given the pipeline is a few thousand kilometers, or 1,500 or something, it's quite long undersea from Russia to right over to Germany. Why, since Russia blew it up, why didn't they blow it up right near Russian territory where it goes into the water?
To make it look like America did it.
Shit, you see, that's the kind of.
But then your
Machiavellian
follow-up
stuff.
question ought to be, how the hell did we not detect them before they did it?
Well, obviously, Russia has superior technology. Are you allowed
But
to
I
say
thought
that?
they don't, because they need dishwashers to fire anything in Ukraine.
But they used a washing machine. They used the parts of a washing machine to develop.
And that outsmarted the US.
Well,
then
they
what
are
the fuck do
smarter
we
than
need NATO
because
for?
No, but you see, here's the thing. Here's how crazy the Russians are. They're so Machiavellian that the Americans are only looking for their sensors only look for advanced technology devices. So Russia has decided to use legacy.
Russia's
like
so
basically
backward,
30
this managed to get under the radar.
No, they're so smart
Oh.
that they could use more advanced technology, but they use legacy stuff from washing machines from the 1980s because they're almost like analog devices.
Right.
So that's the kind of, they were using like an analog drone. Is basically like just some PVC and a small circuit board from a 1980s washing machine.
Uh-huh.
And it had some explosives on it, and they used a fishing boat with a wire to pull it and drop it. Because it was so old tech,
Yeah.
they didn't pick it up.
They didn't
You
pick
see?
it up. And they managed to succeed in 4 places with detonations.
Yeah. That's
Wow.
how sneaky those Russians are. Need to be worried. Need to be careful of the Russians. Anyway, another question is: this was an attack by Russia on partly owned anyway NATO nation infrastructure, right?
Uh-huh.
And that's pretty serious. Like, that could be construed as a declaration of war. So,
Oh yeah.
what about Article 5 of NATO, collective defense? Shouldn't that have been triggered? Shouldn't NATO have rallied around and said this is
Attack on one
a,
is attack on all.
a deliberate attack on NATO member states' critical energy infrastructure by Russia? Therefore, we're activating Article 5, and all of NATO is now going to war against Russia. Isn't that how it works? I thought that's how it works. At least you should talk about it. Maybe you don't follow
Damn,
through
I
it.
don't have a comeback for that.
Well, the answer is that I don't know. Well, the main question is, where the hell's Greta Thunberg?
I know.
This was like the
Ecological
biggest
disaster.
I mean, it's pretty much stopped now because all of the gas in the pipeline has basically flowed out because it wasn't switched on from source. It was just the gas that was in the pipeline. The pipelines were full, so that's where. So it's basically vented all of that now, and it's done. But it was still the quantity, because the pipeline is so long and so large. It was maybe like Denmark's annual usage.
I heard that 1 year's
gas
use of gas in Denmark.
was vented into the atmosphere, and Greta Thunberg is just silent about it.
And it's 90% methane.
Yeah, and I mean,
The planet's temperature just raised like
40,
half a degree.
4 or 5 degrees. Yeah,
Or 4 or 5. Wow.
yeah. So there's a lot of questions here that.
But then the flip side to that is the greenies are secretly happy with such things because they want to destroy eco-terrorism. Well, terrorism against infrastructure. Like, look at the things at gas stations being attacked, you know. So in a sense, maybe this was a green deal.
Right, yeah. So it's they're willing to take that hit, that small hit of 1 year, like Denmark's 1 year usage of natural gas can be pumped in the atmosphere
Because it saved future years.
because it stops the pipeline and pushes forward the greening usage of green energy or transition to green energy amongst. Maybe it's the Greens behind this. Basically, maybe there's some cabal of right-wing vegan, like elites, who are actually behind all of this. Kind of like the sustainable vegan Illuminati, who.
It did happen near Denmark and Sweden.
Yeah. But they're behind all of it, the whole thing, right? They want this war. They've created this war. The whole, energy crises and all that kind of stuff is them. They're the ones who are pushing this because they know it'll depriving Western countries and many other countries around the world. If you manage to collapse or to seriously damage the whole energy infrastructure, global energy infrastructure, global energy supply, if you manage to damage that, you're forcing people to go forward with the green. Yeah. Sustainable energy transition, right? So it's really that's who's doing it. Yeah. Okay, glad I got that one clear. What about and so that's that. It's all good. Germany doesn't have to worry anymore. They can freeze this winter, but they'll be happy.
Give me some idea. You were trying to explain when von der Leyen and others were saying it's all good because we have other sources coming in that make up for here and there.
Well, on the same day,
give us an idea of the scale of what NordStream supplied.
On the same day,
what's been lost now?
Yeah, on the same day, the Baltic pipeline, I think they called it, or ball something. I don't know what it was. Anyway, it's a pipeline that has been in process. But it was weird. It was like inaugurated on the day that Nord Stream 1 and 2 blew up, which is highly coincidental, beyond coincidence, really. So it was, they had a ceremony, an opening ceremony, inauguration ceremony, and it's a pipeline coming using Norwegian gas from Norwegian offshore gas fields coming, and it's a cooperation between Denmark and Poland. So it's a relatively small pipeline from basically running north to south. Through the Baltic into Denmark and down to Poland, and to great fanfare. And even von der Leyen, I think that I don't know if I have that, but von der Leyen faded it this week in the past few days on Twitter. This new pipeline is going to be awesome. But I looked at some of the details, and so it'll supply between 3 and 5 billion cubic meters per year. That new pipeline,
right?
That was inaugurated on the day that Nord Stream 1 and 2.
That sounds like a lot. Are we saved?
No.
No.
Germany's annual consumption is 88 90 billion.
Oh,
So this is between 3 and 5. So 3%?
well, if they have cold showers
Yeah, a
might-
lot of cold showers.
and only deindustrialize a bit.
Yeah. So Germany was using, I think Germany in Europe uses the most, because it's the most industrial country, I suppose, and relies mostly on gas. It uses the most natural gas of any European country.
Yeah, biggest population too.
Yeah, biggest population. Okay. Other countries variable, but all quite high usage, like more or less in keeping with their population numbers. Similar to Germany, a bit less than Germany, but similar numbers. So as you go down the population figures in different countries, they consume less and less. But overall, in the EU states, it's something around 500 billion cubic meters
per year.
Yeah.
And NordStream supplied how much of that?
NordStream capability,
Right.
probably about 20.
Actuality from number one and
Total-
then total number two.
Between the two of them, probably was capable of supplying about a third.
And the rest came from other pipelines.
Other sources.
Over land.
Yeah, well, also Russian pipelines that have since been shut down as well. The Yamal pipeline, for example.
Is that down?
Yeah, the Poles shut that down, or the Ukrainians/Poles shut that down.
What is still running?
Turkstream
to Turkey
that's it.
and then into Greece.
That's it.
What about the one through Ukraine?
Nah, not doing that anymore. Sanctions, man. Sanction.
And wasn't there one to Finland? That's gone.
Yeah. They all went.
So they really have shut off Russian gas. Well, excuse me, Russia shut the gas off.
Of course, yeah.
Whatever.
I think they keep saying that Russia shut it off. Like Russia just decided they didn't want to sell gas to Europe anymore, which wasn't true. Like obviously, we know. I mean, anybody with any sense knows that it was European countries who decided to stop buying Russian gas. They were very, very public and open about the fact that they were cutting down. They were, making definite and serious efforts to going forward immediately what they could do, and going forward to reduce it right down to, I think they have a target of like 2027, 5 years or something. Zero, no Russian gas whatsoever.
Right.
Russia's just going to stop existing for Europe by 2027 as an energy supplier. Even though it's like got the largest natural gas resource in the world, that's just going to be magically made to
Not
disappear.
count.
Not count. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Which is bizarre, because that's not really how economies work. That's not how the world works. That's not how the world works. That's not how the global energy market works. You can't just take out one particularly large consumer of natural gas. Can't just remove the largest producer of natural gas
It reminds
and
me
say
how
you don't exist anymore as a natural gas producer
Yeah.
for us. It's like
it's just create a reality.
But-
It reminds me of what they did in the financial sphere.
Yeah.
They just said, well, Russia's bankrupt. Well, how do you know? Well, we got our credit rating agencies to say it was, and that's it.
yeah,
It's bankrupt. But the ruble isn't, and the amount they're earning from trade is as high as ever.
yeah.
And their financials are sound. Their debt remains the same, even though you confiscated about $300 billion
Yeah.
worth of Russian goods, assets. They're still rich.
Yeah.
So what?
There's-
But then they created the reality in their heads that no, it's defaulted.
A lot of it's propaganda as well. That's a caveat. There's a lot of it's just talk, and it's not really true what they say, but they say it anyway because they've got an agenda. Here's an example. Just throw up that picture. Just we're talking about pipelines. Here's pipelines for you. This is only more or less Western Europe, Eastern Europe into more or less Western Europe. It doesn't show Spain there because that's kind of separate. But those are pipelines. So the Yamal, one coming through Belarus and going through Ukraine and into what's beside Ukraine there, is that, Hungary or
Brotherhood was
Poland.
the first one.
Yeah. But so the networks to the left there in Poland and Germany and stuff are all at the top, where that top section, Yamal, Nel, Yagal, Opal, Tag, Transgas, they all come from Russian gas. They're just networks within Europe,
Sure,
right?
yeah.
So the main arteries coming in. Yamal Europe, Yamal 2 never got off the little extra pipelines. There's basically 2 Yamal pipelines, one going through Poland, one coming through Ukraine there.
Yamal 2 was going to until they toppled the Austrian government.
Right. Yeah. And then Transgas Tag, all that kind of stuff are connections further westwards. Brotherhood more or less shut down because it's going straight through Ukraine. Soyuz shut down because it's, although one of those might still be working because they're coming from Kazakhstan. And if you look further south there, so BlueStream, the only one, which is the same, I think is the same as it goes through Turkey, is the only one, the offshoot of Brotherhood that goes down BlueStream. That's basically the same as TurkStream.
Right.
So that's the only one that's actually carrying Russian gas now down through Turkey into Bulgaria.
And that's the one they tried to blow up 4 days before NordStream. And it was only opened a couple of years ago.
Right.
So the only one substantially that Europe is relying on from the east is the one that von der Leyen went over to TANAP to Azerbaijan to secure. Because great fanfare, because but it's like tiny compared to what Russia contributes.
Yeah. There are a few more coming that aren't shown in this map. Coming just off the side of the map to the left, there is obviously you've got half of France. Spain is missing, but there are pipelines coming from Spain, from Algeria.
Is there a pipeline under
There's
the
a pipeline
sea
from over the Mediterranean, into Spain, and Spain has a lot of LNG
terminals capacity.
The most in any European country, so they can receive a lot of LNG, and there's all sorts of talk about maybe because there isn't a pipeline then coming from Spain into France, for example, which would be obviously overland rather than going undersea, which is more expensive, but the Frenchies aren't really enthusiastic about it. So there's all sorts of economic and maneuvering going on. Even despite the fact that they're all claiming that we're all worried about supplies of energy and where we're going to get them from, there are other available sources that probably won't substitute in the short term for Russian gas, but that will do something. But even then, they're quibbling over it because of national interests, basically. So it's all a bit of a
so
bit
are
of
Europe
show, really.
divided?
Yeah.
Which is what Russia wants, or is it what Washington wants?
Well, yeah, obviously. You accuse other people of what you want yourself, what you're doing yourself. So,
and then of course we have this outrageous tweet from Radek Sikorsky.
Yeah.
What the crack was he smoking?
Good stuff.
Thank you, USA. Picture of Nord Stream bubbling up in the Baltic Sea. He's since taken it down. But he left it up for a few days, and just about everyone got a screenshot, so the whole world saw it.
Yeah, and tell him who Sikorsky is.
Sikorsky now, as you can see by his title, is a member of the European Parliament, but he's a lot more than that. He's basically in a dozen American think tanks, all PNAC type, neocon, married to a bloody neocon, and Applebaum. Total state stenographer for the US regime, virulent Russophobe, of course, and it's a fitting kind of, it's new Polish in America with old Polish, the marriage of the two. It's a great, he's also he's also an ex-minister. He was defense minister and finance minister at one point in Poland. He's probably looking to become prime minister there at some point. If he can possibly out Russophobe the current regime in Poland, this guy wants a chance at the top seat in Poland. Sikorsky. I mean, the guy himself was caught on tape, sort of hot mic moment, years ago, complaining about how the US has either Poland specifically or European countries in general on their knees, i.e., the US exerts undue influence on us. That's maybe 10 years old. I'll try and look for it. And 10 years later, well, thank you, USA. Thank you, USA, ... for severing Russia's energy links with Europe, thereby ensuring European dependence on the United States.
LNG.
That's the long-term goal here, right? Is to get everyone looking
right
to
more
the
dependent.
US only.
Absolutely. There's actually I'll just give people a bit of a history here. It's kind of interesting to show how things have changed and the subversion, let's say, of Europe to American interests against European interests. This is just I can kind of read it out, but it's this is a series of tweets that I threw up there. So the Brotherhood pipeline that you saw there, that has been kind of mothballed on the map. It's one of the pipelines that runs through Ukraine. So this is just a history in that pipeline. It's back in the. It was established in the 80s, or started to be built in the 80s. So that's the name, the Urengoi Pomari anyway pipeline, Brotherhood pipeline. The Soviet plans to build it were strongly opposed by the Reagan administration because they were afraid that Western Europe would become dependent on Soviet gas supplies, giving an energy leverage to the Soviets. They also feared the Kremlin would use the export revenue for military purposes. Shock horror, like as if like any country doesn't use some of its revenue for military purposes. Anyway, so in December 81, the US imposed sanctions preventing American companies from exporting oil and gas technologies necessary for the building of the pipeline to the Soviet Union. This building of the pipeline was done in conjunction with European countries because the gas flow was coming to Europe, obviously. In June 82, these sanctions were expanded to cover subsidiaries of US companies in Europe. The US's European allies, however, refused to boycott the pipeline, and the foreign ministers of the EU called this US sanctions illegal and sent a formal note of protest. From the EU perspective, participation in the pipeline project was an opportunity for the depressed steel and engineering industry and as a way to diversify from OPEC oil supplies, which are controlled by the USA. Therefore, Western European governments insisted that the contracts already signed between the Soviets and Euro companies should be honoured. This led to several European companies being sanctioned by the US and Reagan to say, well, they can have their damn pipeline, but not with American equipment and not with American tech. And apparently it was one of the, this issue was one of the most severe transatlantic crises of the Cold War. And as I said, here we are again. But there's a lot more at stake this time.
Yeah,
and a lot less resistance.
The Americans didn't walk away last time going, well, you can do it yourselves then, which is precisely what they proceeded to do, which gave a boost to both German and Russian industry because they had to build the damn thing themselves. Well, this time it's like, instead of saying you shouldn't do it, they just blew it up.
Yeah, they create a fact on the ground, right?
Yeah.
And of course, what do you call them? Again, just to clarify that it was actually Russia that blew up that blew up their own pipeline. Here's Blinken highlighting the fact that there's no reason whatsoever to believe that America had anything to do with it, and that's a conspiracy theory.
Ultimately, this is also a tremendous opportunity. It's a tremendous opportunity to once and for all remove the dependence on Russian energy, and thus to take away from Vladimir Putin the weaponization of energy as a means of advancing his imperial designs. That's very significant, and that offers tremendous strategic opportunity for the years to come. But meanwhile, we're determined to do everything we possibly can to make sure that the consequences of all of this are not borne by citizens in our countries, or for that matter, around the world.
Our countries, like Europe primarily. And we're going to do that by shoving as much LNG down America's high-priced LNG down Europe's throat as possible, making shitloads of money in the process. But it's just a pure coincidence that it's a tremendous opportunity to achieve America's
strategic opportunity
to achieve America's long-standing geopolitical objectives to cut Europe off from Russian energy supplies. That's been there for like decades, right? So this event that effectively, achieves that objective or goes a long way to achieving that objective is purely coincidental. It's purely fortuitous, and it's just an opportunity for us. We had nothing to do with it. So carry on, and yeah.
Imagine the mental gymnastics.
You have to be a retard
to believe that.
You have to be a retard.
Russia just scored an own goal.
Russia blew its own pipeline up.
That served America's long-term strategic interest. Putin is dumb as a rock.
That's how stupid they are, yeah.
Look at this one. This is Washington Post 2004. Because I wondered, has there ever been past form for, actually attacking a pipeline? Never mind saying you don't like it and threatening to sanction over it. Well, there is. headline. Can you? Does that open? I'm not sure. It might be behind a
No.
paywall.
No, it doesn't.
Behind a paywall. Damn. I'll include it in the show links. Washington Post. Reagan approved plan to sabotage Soviets. So the story comes from a guy named Thomas Reed. He was former Air Force Secretary who was serving on the Reagan National Security Council in 1982. He brought a plan to Reagan, which he approved, to covertly blow up one of the Russian pipelines. Which one, I don't know. I don't think it's named. The key thing here is this was never confirmed or denied by either side, so it went down as a secret. And it's only this guy's, Thomas Reed's memoirs, that claims he conceived it, the plan was approved, and that they carried it out. Somewhere in Russia proper. It was, I think he calls it the Trans-Siberian Pipeline. Which one that corresponds to? Maybe Brotherhood? I don't know.
I hacked it.
Oh, good job. Good job. There
It's
it
not
is.
the whole thing, but
So this is from almost 20 years ago about an event 40 years ago in which a U.S. official, Air Force Secretary, claims in his memoirs, we blew up a Russian pipeline. And that the way they did it sounds very sophisticated. It sounds a bit too fantastical, but maybe I don't know enough about this. What he claimed was that they got wind of a kind of a network of spies in the US, of Soviet spies that were trying to glean as much Western tech as possible. And so they flipped this spying operation on itself by feeding it deliberately corrupted or Trojan stuff that would actually cause critical infrastructure issues back in Russia when it was applied. And he claimed that it was software. Now, this is where it's tricky. It wouldn't have been software communicated through the internet. The internet didn't exist, but software nonetheless introduced into an early computing digital system the Soviets used. This is why I can't get a picture on what the tech was like. There's a counter to this theory, which is that back in 1982, it was all manual and or hydraulically controlled. So if Russia turns a valve on or off, it has to be done locally and manually. He's claiming that, no, in fact, there was some digitization by that point. Anyway, this flawed software caused the controlling of valves to go haywire, massive overpressurization in the line, and then it exploded. He specifically said, we saw this explosion from space, and guys down the road at the Pentagon were so alarmed by it, they thought a nuclear bomb had gone off. It was the largest, brightest explosion they'd ever seen.
Sure, that would be in the record somewhere, like on some explosion, even if it isn't ascribed to America or even a pipeline attack or anything like that. Look up Wikipedia. Trawl Wikipedia for some reference to it.
Maybe it's too
internet.
grand, because he goes on to say that the software or similar types of software were introduced elsewhere, and it caused critical infrastructure failures in Russia throughout the 80s. And he boasts contributed significantly to ultimately the political collapse of the USSR.
Maybe.
Okay, so maybe this is fantasy or disinfo or something like that. But at the very least, someone in the United States sketched out what their fantasy would be to destroy pipelines in Russia. 40 years ago, or at least 20 years ago, reflecting back on 40 years,
Yeah.
So maybe it was Reagan approves plan, wishful thinking plan, but now it's actual.
Yeah. Well, just before you go too far with your conspiracy theorizing there,
It's not mine. It's a bloody U.S. Air Force Secretary.
he's a conspiracy theorist too. AP has a word on the final word on the Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2 explosions. The suggestion that the US caused the damage was circulating on online forums popular with American conservatives and followers of QAnon, which is a conspiracy theory movement which asserts that Trump is fighting a battle against a satanic child trafficking sect that controls world events. So, Neil, you don't want to be associated with that kind of thing, okay? if your deductive reasoning leads you and millions of other people with a functioning brain to conclude that America most likely blew up the pipeline, you are effectively part of a group that believes that Trump is fighting a battle against the satanic child trafficking sect that controls the world. Anyway, just so you know what you're getting yourself into. Fair warning, according to AP. Anyway, clown shoes.
Clown shoes.
Yeah,
They think it's clever. They think that kind of shit has a psychological effect. Maybe it does on some people because you don't want to be associated with, so you back away.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah, guilt.
It's a psycho's bluff.
It's
A bit like Russian troll. The Russian troll thing. Psycho's bluff.
Yeah.
You know, because you start defending. Well, no, I'm not. You know, some of my best friends are Westerners. That kind of shit. You know, you're in the frame they've set up for you.
Mm-hmm.
You're trapped.
Mm-hmm.
You actually want to come out and say, yeah, I'm not only a Russian troll, I am the Kremlin.
Mm-hmm.
Putin listens to me. It's my brain. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you have to mock it because it's farcical, right?
Yeah.
But if you start to take it as real,
Engage with it. Yeah.
it will. It maybe not so much affect you, but it will affect others around you. You know, it's clever.
Yeah.
It's psychopathic. But
So the other thing that happened this week, major event, was, as you mentioned earlier on, the incorporation of 4 regions into Russia via referendum.
well, I think
referenda.
NordStream was a response. They knew it was coming 3 days later, so NordStream was the American response.
Yeah, take that. Putin.
Oh, there's 2 things that we didn't include. I don't know if you want to bother at this point, but we have Biden and Newland saying
Yeah.
before the invasion started in
Last
February,
December, yeah. Biden in December.
January, whatever.
Yeah.
Listen, if Russia does invade Ukraine, that's end of Nord Stream.
Yeah.
The journalist clarifies to him, but of course she's trapped in the frame. She goes, but sir, Germany is a sovereign country. How can you make, and Biden just with his squinty, coal black eyes smirks at her and says, we'll put an end to it.
Yep. And Newland says one way or another. That's obviously... Yeah. Anyway, yeah, referenda then this week. Incorporation of 4 regions into Russia, up in the stakes, I suppose. Because so far...
Well, first of all, let's acknowledge that, I mean...
They're sham referenda. Sham referenda. Come on.
They'll say sham on 2 levels. One is that you can't just call them like that, you know,
In a war zone.
Because it's a war zone. But okay, that's one issue. The other issue is, are they sham because the results are fake?
Because we don't like the results.
But they're probably real, aren't they?
They're representative.
Because I thought it was interesting that the clear majority are 99, 98 are the 2 that have suffered the most. People united in grief. Whereas the other 2, it's more new for them, Zaporizhia and Kherson. Plus the fact that there just maybe aren't as many people who would have, before all this, considered themselves ethnic Russian. You've got more, no, I'm Ukrainian identity in those 2 regions. So it was realistic, I think. It was still a clear majority in all 4, but you had a more realistic breakdown.
Yeah. Well, if you have a look at these, for example, I'll give you some historical context. This first one is 2004 elections, general elections in Ukraine, and the way people voted. So, just so you know, Yanukovych was a kind of more or less pro-Russian politician in that election, and Yushchenko was more or less the Western color revolution presidential candidate in that election. He won, Yushchenko, in 2004, and there's the voting. So basically, blue color, some color of blue, purple, whatever, is people who voted essentially to be aligned with Russia, and the other color is pro-Western. So that's that one. I was just trying to think there of a better description of that color than blue or purple. My wife would definitely have a better description of it, but not me. Anyway, this second one is from the subsequent. I think this was this was 2000.
The last one before the coup.
Yeah.
10, 11.
Yeah. again, so then Yanukovych, again the pro-Russian guy, he's back, and Timoshenko, obviously pro-Western. So again, you see the same pattern of the way people voted, either looking west or looking east, essentially. But then,
and the more west you go, the more Western, the more and so on. It's really as a country pulled apart.
Right, and then interestingly though, you can go back a long time, because you could say, well, that's just modern or whatever. But it's interesting to actually go back quite a while. I think this is it's 1926, and it's in Russian, but it shows people how they identified ethnically, how they saw themselves, with the the shaded basically colors being people identified as Russian, effectively, and that's in 1926. So this has been something that's, and it's the same in many countries, you know, as we know, and it's been something that's been exploited in many countries, which is ethnic divide, and it's easily exploitable if someone wants to exploit it. Some people try to keep it together and keep it under wraps, and help people, you know, of different ethnic backgrounds, you know, good leaders attempt to keep that under wraps and keep people living together peaceably.
Well,
people who
Russia,
want to,
for starters.
Yeah, Russia obviously has a long, you know, has a long history, a long experience of doing that in such a big country with such a large ethnic divide across it, and they've done pretty well doing that. But so it's just to show you that this is something that goes back a long way, and it's interesting to see the voting practices kind of reflecting something that goes back almost 100 years. Voting practices up until today. So anyways, to have these referenda, people, you can, like I said, it was representative. Whether or not the actual numbers were, if everybody voted, or if numbers were massaged in some way, whatever the bottom line is.
Well, international observers were impressed.
Exactly, yeah. So I have no problem with it being representative of the will of the majority of the people in those regions. The problem is that it was a maneuver by the Russians, obviously, to make these four regions part of Russia, because now NATO has another kind of dilemma in a certain sense. They get rid of their NordStream, German reliance on NordStream or Russian gas dilemma, but Putin gave them another dilemma with this situation where NATO has to decide now whether they're going to effectively, I mean, whether this means anything or not in practice, officially NATO supplying Ukrainian troops is a party to a war directly with Russia, not in Ukraine. Prior to these referenda, NATO was simply helping Ukraine defend its territory against Russia, who had invaded Ukrainian territory. Now, any help by the US or any Western allies or whatever to the Ukrainians to attack these four regions is a direct attack on Russian territory, officially.
Officially from Russia's perspective.
Officially from any perspective, anybody who reads it would have to say that's officially what it is. Of course, yeah, they might say that these aren't actually...
well,
they
won't recognize...
They don't recognize the referenda, yeah.
But the only way this matters...
They don't say it's right.
...is if the Russians treat it accordingly on their side.
If they believe it, yeah. If they decide that that's the case. But
What
does that
look
change
like
practically?
Because they announced partial mobilization last week.
Yeah, as
it does
part of
look
the
like
referendum.
de facto they do. All kinds of rumors about bringing out the big guns,
but
not seen yet. But as we explained last week, this process would take time.
But from a practical perspective, what does it change? What's Russia going to do? Is it going to do anything different? Or is it just going to continue on to fight against Ukraine?
It wouldn't be a special military operation anymore. It would be defense of the motherland.
Right. You can change the name of it.
Which in practice means, black swans dropping a heavy tonnage of bombs
on
Ukraine.
Maybe. But that, I don't know. That's what people are
Well,
expecting.
we don't know, yeah. But this week, people expect it to happen like on the stroke of midnight.
Mm-hmm.
Putin ends his speech, and then they're like, but the partial mobilization takes time.
Mm-hmm.
They're showing videos on Russian news of the training the reservists are going through.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. They say they've all had experience. A lot of them would just look like they're holding a gun for the first time.
Mm.
They're not just going to be sent in this week.
Right.
This is like next year. Remember what Putin said. This is probably going to go on until next year.
Mm-hmm.
This is not overnight. Of course, in the last day, possibly as a probably as a response to this, to kind of capture the headlines back for Ukraine, to give the West something else to talk about other than huge crowds of Russians waving their flags and cheering on Putin, is the news that an apparently strategic town, Liman, has fallen to Ukraine.
Yeah, well, the Russian fallen as in the Russians.
The Russians left.
The Russians left, and Liman is, I think, it's 20,000 people. That's 20 square kilometers. Again, propaganda rules the day here. It's like everybody thinks, that obviously the Ukrainians will, be bigging it up as a major victory and all that kind of stuff, along with the Western media. But practically, whatever. It's from morale has a lot to do with all of this, right? What you're seen to be, if you're seen to be winning or seen to be losing, whether or not you're actually losing, I think, and that's why the Russian government in particular doesn't really care too much about propaganda. Like obviously the West is completely dominant in propaganda along with the Ukrainians. The Russian government doesn't really care because it's confident that it doesn't need to fight that propaganda war, because at the end of the day, it has its own objectives. And it will continue. They don't believe that the propaganda war, the information war, has much of an effect.
Well, they might, if they weren't sure about how the population as a whole feels about it. I think they don't care about the propaganda war because they're confident that the mass of the Russian population is inoculated against being turned.
Right.
That's the only thing that's important to them. The Western population, they're like, whatever, you can
say
win.
what you want.
We're not trying to convince them.
Yeah.
It's our own population. If our own population throws a spanner in the works and the reservists start shooting their commanders in large numbers and there's a freaking mutiny like there was when the first Soviets formed in 1917, then we've got a freaking problem. But they're confident that the people are behind them. So
yeah, and this is people get focused on the minutiae, and it kind of bores me. Like, I mean, okay, it's interesting to look at the details and stuff, but that's not really the point. There obviously is a bigger game being played here, and this is part of a bigger game. And as Putin has said repeatedly, it's part of a transition from a multipolar or a unipolar world dominated by America to a multipolar world. And I mean, you could arguably say that if having declared these 4 regions part of Russia, and if Russia then over the next few months can actually take, occupy the rest of the regions that the rest of those regions that it doesn't occupy right now, up to their borders, you could arguably say that they could say that is that's the culmination of our special military operation. It's we've achieved our goals, and it's over, and we won. We took 20% of Russian territory. We took, there's 8 million people incorporated into Russia and all the natural resources and of those regions, and done. See you later. We're packing up and going home. We won. Nah. We won. We got what we wanted. Bye. You know what I mean? They could do that, But again, it's part of it. The whole thing is, obviously, there's a lot more implications in terms of all the stuff we've been talking about, in terms of energy and stuff. And on the day, as part of his speech about the incorporation of the 4 regions into the Russian Federation, Putin again made it, spoke to that broader, broad-scale changes and the bigger game that's being played, and the transformation that's underway. And I think that's something that you always have to remind yourself of and look to. You know what I mean? That don't get focused on who's going to win a particular battle in Ukraine, or whether what you think is winning or losing in Ukraine is significant. It's not. If you just throw it up there, Scotty, and scroll down to, if you go down towards the bottom, it's pretty much. It begins with, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 7 paragraphs from the bottom. So it begins with today, or no, does it? No. It's the world has entered. There you go. The world has entered a period of a fundamental revolutionary transformation. New centers of power are emerging, and they represent the majority of the international community. They are ready not only to declare their interests, but also to protect them. They see in multipolarity an opportunity to strengthen their sovereignty, which means gaining genuine freedom, historical prospects, and the right to their own independent, creative, and distinctive forms of development to a harmonious process. This is Putin, by the way, I'm quoting. As I have already said, we have many like-minded people in Europe and the United States, and we feel and see their support. Who would have thought that? At least that's what he thinks. An essentially emancipatory anti-colonial movement against unipolar hegemony is taking shape in the most diverse countries and societies. Its power will only grow with time. It is this force that will determine our future geopolitical reality. So populism is going to determine our future geopolitical reality, basically. Today we are fighting for a just and free path, first of all for ourselves, for Russia, in order to leave dictate and despotism in the past. I am convinced that countries and peoples understand that a policy based on the exceptionalism of whoever it may be and the suppression of other cultures and peoples is inherently criminal, and that we must close this shameful chapter. The ongoing collapse of Western hegemony is irreversible, Neil. And I repeat, things will never be the same globally. The battlefield to which destiny and history have called us is a battlefield for our people, for the great historical Russia. For the great historical Russia, for future generations, our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. We must protect them against enslavement and monstrous experiments that are designed to cripple their minds and souls. Today we are fighting so that it would never occur to anyone that Russia, our people, our language, or our culture can be erased from history. Today we need a consolidated society, and this consolidation can only be based on sovereignty, freedom, creation, and justice. Our values are humanity, mercy, and compassion. And I want to close with the words of a true patriot, Ivan Ilyin. If I consider Russia my motherland, that means that I love as a Russian, contemplate and think, sing, and speak as a Russian. That I believe in the spiritual strength of the Russian people. Its spirit is my spirit, its destiny is my destiny, its suffering is my grief, and its prosperity is my joy. And then he just talks about the four regions, and that they made the choice to be with their people, to be with their motherland, to share its destiny, and to be victorious together with it. The truth is with us, and behind us is Russia.
It's not an interesting ending. It's not God is with Russia, which is it's an official slogan of Ukraine. It's not God bless Russia, like God bless USA, but the official closing slogan used in the United States. It's the truth.
The truth will set you free.
Russia.
The truth is the most, according to him, he believes the truth is the most powerful force. More powerful than God.
It's the highest force.
Or maybe it is God.
It's an extraordinary... The second half of the concluding statements there's a switch. He switches back to talking about us as in our Russian people, the Russian people, our motherland. And, he's I don't know if it's intended that way, but he, just to wrap it up, he turns it seems like a turn back to talking to his Russian audience. But the first part of the conclusion, and many other parts of the whole speech are about people anywhere on this earth. And he calls to them specifically. He mentioned briefly in there that, there are many in the West, even in Europe.
And America.
Who see it as we do.
Scary. Get them out of here.
There's two levels to it. It's patriotic. Obviously, there needs to be a rallying cry for Russian people to get behind his use of Russia as an instrument for a bigger thing he has in his sights. This for me is the revelation of 2022. Is the clarity now. I suspected it as long ago as 2014, but it's clear 8 years later that Putin has
a grand plan.
A grand plan or vision of how things ought to be. He is like Spartacus leading a slave rebellion. Only this isn't like just a forum in Rome. This is global. And to back that up, I cite. Look at all the references he made in a sweeping speech that goes back hundreds of years. He goes back to the medieval times and the beginning of European colonialism and lists the crimes and injustices of said colonialism. Then says it's still going on today. It's still colonialist. They say all these things, but it's all lies.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the way they act and behave is the same.
Mm-hmm.
And then within that, to make sure he's not making a sweeping statement about all Westerners, we saw in the conclusion that he makes a distinction. But elsewhere earlier in the speech, he makes a distinction between, he says the Western elites are so nuts these days that they're blaming their own populations for the crimes of their colonial past
Mm-hmm.
and punishing them accordingly. So he calls that out too. This is so sweeping, and
Yeah.
it's like if you were an ardent anti-imperialist lefty and you were to pack all the crimes of European colonialism and then today more broadly globalist neo-colonialism into one speech, what are the things you would list off? The Opium Wars in China,
Mm-hmm.
the enslavement of Africa, the slave trade in Africa. It's all there in one speech, you know.
Yeah.
It's so clear, so concise, and this is why they absolutely have to trash the man of the West, because people really, if they heard this speech, if they read it, there's very little for anyone to disagree with. Even some of his flagrant critics, they were like, the speech is correct. Then they point out all the things that are true, and then they conclude, but it's still nuts, you know, what he's doing, because the guy I have in mind is a kind of an atheist podcaster, something he's been on Joe Rogan a few times. Forget his name. I think he's British. And so he's lefty. He's coming at this as a lefty. And he's like, all the colonial stuff, he's like, true. But here he's declaring holy war on the West. This thing about Satanism, that thing that the AP brings up about QAnon and how batshit crazy it was, that they want to take our kids, you know, and either be pedophiles towards them or conduct experiments on them. That's where they balk and they go, no.
Right.
This is far right, you know, this is neo-Hitler stuff. But the thing is, it's neither far left nor far right. It's just things that are true. He just spoke the truth.
Yeah. Well. Yeah.
Can you find anything in there that you would disagree with?
No, but that's from my perspective.
But isn't it remarkable that your perspective, which is far older than what Putin just declared here, is the same on almost all counts?
Yeah.
Going back 20 years.
Yeah, exactly.
You didn't know there was a world leader out there until now who shared the same perspective as you.
No. But that's because I've been subverted by Russian propaganda.
You see, that's why it's horseshit. All of us Western dissidents have been saying this shit for 20 years.
Or more, yeah.
Then, now we have, it turns out, a patron, so to speak, who has nukes in his arsenal, among other things. But that Russian troll, that's obviously horseshit, after the fact horseshit, by the two-dimensional thinkers out there who go, what's going on in the world? Oh, look, I see Putin saying some things, and I see all these other... And they sound that, it must be coming from the Kremlin.
Yeah.
No, you dipshits.
I get my daily briefings
He's
from
a
the Kremlin.
truther, like everyone else was before he either realized himself he was a truther, or he's been holding this shit in for 20 years, waiting for the right moment to blast it all out in one go.
He's biding his time, yeah. Because when you come out and say that in the public stage, you got to have something to back it up with.
Right. Otherwise, you're a goner. You've got color revolution tomorrow. You've got assassination in the plane the next day. You name it. There's a great bit in this where he's like decrying like the obsequious nature of other leaders who won't stand up, but he knows that they think the same thing. He says the U.S., referring to the neo-colonial aspect of today's system, the U.S. actually continues to occupy Germany, Japan, the Republic of Korea, and other countries, which they cynically refer to as equals and allies. Look now, what kind of alliance is that? The whole world knows that the top officials in these countries are being spied on and that their offices and homes are bugged. It's a disgrace for those who do this and for those who, like slaves, silently and meekly swallow this arrogant behavior. One more paragraph, the subsequent, I think it was 2 down from that. Washington demands more and more sanctions against Russia, and the majority of European politicians obediently go along with it. They clearly understand that by pressuring the EU to completely give up Russian energy and other resources, the United States is practically pushing Europe towards deindustrialization in a bid to get its hands on the entire European market. The European elites understand everything. They do. but they prefer to serve the interests of others. This is no longer servility, but direct betrayal of their own peoples. And then in his Putin-esque way, he says, well, God bless them. It's up to them.
Mm.
I mean, he wouldn't have ever said that before because that's going to risk diplomatic issues. Can you imagine if he says that and then he has to go and talk to Merkel about it? What the hell did you just say about me? You know, you've caused me a problem at home. I now have the AfD rising in the polls against me because of what you just said. Now he doesn't give a shit. Now he's all in. He's like, get the AfD, get the Trumpists, get anyone populist, anyone just come up and take over these people. Because these insane people are a threat to me personally, obviously, to the Russian people, and to their own people.
Somebody in the comments there, he's got a funny name. Go to the comments there. Somebody in the comments said, down the bottom, leakage. I'm going to try and pronounce that. I don't think Putin is really fighting the New World Order.
What does he mean by the New World Order? You know, It's all like there's so many different versions of it.
Well, he's fighting America, obviously. The Atlantis,
right? Well,
Anglo-American
for us,
empire.
that is objectively the New World Order.
Yeah, they're pushing for a new
Now,
world.
there's other versions. There's the one that in the right in America says, no, it's not us, because you don't want to be the bad guy. It's the UN coming in with the Black Hawk helicopters in the dead of night. They're about to take us over any day now. No, that's disinformation from the CIA. The United States is the New World Order. We've been in the New World Order for 75 years.
It's been, well, yeah.
And it
it's
has
coming to a head,
satanic characteristics. Or it didn't always have those.
You're starting to sound like QAnon.
Ah,
now.
fuck it. Putin himself said it. Putin himself said it. He cited Satanism. He said, what is it?
He's QAnon. He's Q.
He didn't just say Satanism. Like, he gave a definition of it. He said, what is it if you're not just flipping the values of everything, family values, whatever, cultural values, and making the reverse of them? What is it if not a religion in reverse? Satanism. You know? And Putin's not really fighting the New World Order. I suppose that the most recent thing they give proponents of that argument is Putin. Where was Putin on COVID?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Good point. He seemed to be on side, in contrast to Belarus leader Lukashenko, who spoke out against it, acted against it. Putin instead went, yeah, okay, mass vaccines, yeah, okay, yeah, lockdowns. But then, when did COVID end? I mean, the worst of the excesses of all the measures. When did that all just suddenly go away? Except for the bloody vaccines, but whatever. When did the most punitive totalitarian aspects of it go away? They went away on February 24th, 2022.
It was replaced by that, yeah.
Which, that, again, it only speaks to a strategy. How else does Putin keep this in? These are his true thoughts now revealed.
He also can only do so much. People who think are looking for some kind of savior who's going to come like a variation of Jesus coming back or something like that to save humanity, you know, that's not going to happen, you know. And someone like Putin is the best we've got in that respect to do what he can, and what he can do is limited. But he can do enough. And like we've said, I think we said previously, the main point about all this is that in pushing back against America and its designs on the world effectively to maintain its increase its hegemony, having someone to simply push back and say no and be able to mean it exposes the fact that that is what America is doing, and exposes the hypocrisy and the lies and the criminality of the Americans. And that's the most valuable thing, really. Apart from any changes on the ground or whatever, it's actually exposing for the population what America is really all about. And they're forced to come out and admit what they're about because they're being challenged by someone. And that's the main benefit, as far as I can see, on a broad scale, on a kind of macro scale.
Yeah.
But
sentiments like this wish there was no order. That you're a statist if you believe in any kind of order. Oh, yeah, law and order, so you're one of them statists. Well, I believe that everyone is a beautiful potential human being at heart, and all have agency. And everyone should just be let be, like in an anarchic type of system. It would be glorious. There should be no world order of any type. You see, that's the kind of ultra-libertarian it comes. It's a Western thing, you know. It comes from the constant thing we had droned into it. You know, individual freedom.
Well,
everyone has individual autonomy, and everyone gets to vote in free and fair elections.
Right.
Blah blah.
The individual is paramount, and that's kind of stuff that Peterson talks about. Like the individual is most important. It's, you know, pushing back against the idea of group identity and in groups and all that kind of stuff, and group ideology pushing back against that the individual is the most important in a society. But that's true, but each individual isn't capable of ruling the world themselves or ruling their own world. Human nature, by definition, requires a kind of a hierarchy, and you want it to be a benevolent one, and you need to have some kind of a state organization and some kind of a leadership and all that kind of stuff. And the real problem is, do you have good ones or bad ones? You're not going to get pushing all that responsibility back on human beings. It's not the way human nature works, and never has and never will, as long as they're here. So people arguing for that are just don't understand. They're deluded. They haven't really looked at human nature and the masses of human beings on this planet and how they've lived out their lives throughout the millennia.
Or just watch the last 3 years.
Yeah.
Govern me harder, Daddy.
At what a clown show it is, yeah.
At its worst, when it hit first, we watched 95% of people, including the ostensible libertarians online. I'm against the state.
Yeah.
They all just, but yeah, it's a real. Guys, are you looking at the numbers? It's not actually Black Death. People are dying. I mean,
but Zelensky joined NATO. Put him up there, Scotty. It was a grand ceremony, all the pomp and circumstance as you might expect to see. As you might expect to see at a joining of NATO ceremony. Here it is. That's Zelensky and two dudes. Anyway, in the street with a small coffee table.
One of them's a minister of defense. The guy on his left.
The guy on the left is the minister of cakes and
pies.
And pies. And go ahead.
Ми робимо свій визначальний крок, підписуючи заявку України на вступ у пришвидшеному порядку в НАТО.
The gravity of the ceremony. They obviously cleaned that street of people. He's saying they're
He's signing for another shipment of coke.
And we're done. We're in NATO. Let the celebrations begin. Good job. So let's
I
get
feel sorry
clowniness.
from Stoltenberg. The bollocks should have been there at least to give it some. At least von der Leyen went to Kiev and stood with him when he signed the similar thing for accession to the EU.
Yeah. NATO, no, there was pushback. Obviously, NATO said, "Meh, yeah, not now. I have to go." See, yeah, we'll talk about that later, Vladimir.
On the day of the accession signing ceremony, Kremlin and Putin's speech, breaking news headlines: NATO Secretary General is going to give a momentous speech. So they tried to whip up the similar kind of, and so everyone tuned in, and people were, oh Jesus, they're about to declare Ukraine is in NATO, World War III, and so everyone's like, what's Stoltenberg saying? He says, we will never recognize these referenda, and Ukraine won't be joining NATO.
And Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraine.
Here's some more guns. See you later.
Wait, I have more on the speech.
Go ahead.
We can't walk away from that.
No,
That's
it's
not
long. Go on ahead. Stick it up there. So call out what you're reading, and Scotty can search for the first few letters, first few words.
Okay, sorry. This is kind of like Putin the historian.
What's the first
It
letter?
begins, and here it is important.
There you go.
So it's a kind of an aside, right? He's already listed a bunch of crimes, some of them colonial era, some of them 20th century. And here it is important to recall that the West bailed itself out of its early 20th century challenges with World War I.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Profits from World War II helped the United States finally overcome the Great Depression.
Mm-hmm.
and become the largest economy in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And to
Lend-Lease.
impose on the planet the power of the dollar as a global reserve currency.
Mm-hmm.
Things came to a head again in the 1980s. The West emerged from it unscathed, largely by appropriating the inherent inheritance and resources of the collapsed and defunct Soviet Union. That's a fact. Now, I think most people will be like, what? That's not a fact, dude. None of that's... Well, what?
But
I actually know that's factual.
Yeah,
I happen to... Well, we have looked into some of the...
just read a history book.
Well, not read a history book. It's
Well,
only in the last 10 years that a history book of any real consequence about the First World War has emerged.
Yes, okay. Well, but the fact that America financed at least the Second World War, financed European nations fighting the Second World War, and then imposed all of it was on loan, all of the weapons and military industrial apparatus that the European countries needed to fight, including Germany, to fight the Second World War, were all on loan, and Germany itself was paying back to America Second World War loans until 2011. Look it up.
Mm-hmm. So all of this is like, he's not just wants to tear down postmodernist the United States. He's saying the entire basis for the West is the best has always been through
based on corruption,
deceitful means.
Yeah,
y'all aren't up there number one because
you deserve
the
to be
sweat
there.
of your brow,
Yeah.
and all the rest of us are backward
Yeah,
S-holes, as Trump would call them,
it's not manifest.
that you can just plunder from at will.
It's not manifest destiny. It's through connivance and corruption and deceitful practices. So it doesn't deserve to have that position. Is what that's kind of the core of his argument, is that the West doesn't deserve to be in the position it's in morally, and from a practical point of view, it's no longer acceptable. It hasn't been acceptable for a long time, but at this point, there are other countries in the world who have got the shitty end of the stick for quite a long time, and according to Putin, they are no longer willing to accept it, and they're in a position to do something about it, and they're going to try to do something about it, which implies a major shaking up of the world order, and all of that entails, which is a lot of chaos and possibly destruction if America can have its way. But that he's set on that course and he's not turning back.
You mentioned Jordan Peterson.
Mm.
You remember the first videos where he's actually arguing with lefty students at the University of Toronto. They're having a debate outdoors on the streets,
Like Bill C-19, yeah.
From that came, lots of memes and songs and so on, and the moniker now, a social justice warrior. He doesn't mock them necessarily. His serious point to try to get into their heads was, you lefties have overinflated ideas about the effect, the power you can have on change in the world. I'm sure you believe it's for the best, but we've seen those things and they nearly always turn bad. They nearly always don't work. In fact, he said simply, they don't work. Start with changing yourself. Start with changing dynamics in your family. You work out from here. You guys, you're not going to change the world, but Putin actually merits the title. Maybe not social justice warrior, because he mentions social justice and inequality, etc., all through his speech, but he is a global justice warrior. It is merited. He can actually affect change. He's just one man, I know, but he can be the messenger for it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's all it takes, is someone with that idea and with at least some means to make it happen, to start the ball rolling, basically. Someone to stand up, because most of the rest of the world are effectively relatively cowards compared to Putin. They might want it, India, China. China's doing its bit or whatever, but none of them are going to stand up and go toe-to-toe with the American, with the hegemon, right? To do what he's trying to do, someone needs to stand up and be the leader in that respect, to lead that charge, because it's clear that no one else, Modi, Xi, they're two of the main countries, let's say, because of their populations, they would be candidates for it, but obviously they're not going to do it.
Yeah.
But they may follow.
They
Yeah,
may.
you go ahead and we'll see how it goes, and we'll follow you on up, type thing.
Putin is taking a chance here. I don't think he's he sounds very certain.
Mm-hmm.
He probably is certain deserves to be certain in his analysis of the overall trajectory. You know, it may not be Russia that leads it. It may not be me personally that leads it, but this is an ongoing historical process of change. We've explained why in the past. Technological development means now Iran can innovate and create its own drones that can take out US systems and so on. But he has a caveat, I noticed in the speech, and it's the one that you spoke of many years ago about what would ultimately happen if the United States and or / the globalist international class system realized, you know what, we've lost it. You always said they would wreck the chessboard. So that if we can't have it and you want to end hegemony, no one has it. The ultimate threat would be a mad type scenario. But even short of that, they have other ways of wrecking the economy. We just saw what happened to NordStream last week. He says inside the speech, I cannot rule out that they will try to trigger a collapse of the entire system and blame everything on that, or, God forbid, decide to use the old formula of economic growth through war. So he's aware of the risks inherent in the role he's playing within this process. It's not him doing all of it as much as the Western media wants everyone to think he is doing all of it. Obviously not. He's a kind of a messenger or a coalescing point for part of it. But that's interesting that he is doing this in the awareness that they might, like the pigeon shitting on the chessboard, just flip the whole thing or try to. And no doubt that stayed his hand in timing this. He thought, I think he explicitly said it in the speech, well, Russia is ready now at this point to take on the risk of these kinds of things. That's why we didn't do it 8 years ago or before that even. So,
yeah, stick up just to give you the idea of the frame in which this is being looked at. Of course, America's setting this as a fight against good and evil and stuff, and obviously it's been taken up by many people. But this is
well, Putin is now too.
Yeah, of course.
Only
So
you got to decide who's good and who's
that.
evil.
But there's references then that people cling to kind of understand it. Put that one up there, Scotty. This is Luke Skywalker himself.
Oh God!
Let's hear what Luke has to say.
He did reference the movies, and it's not hard to understand why. I mean, Star Wars was always a fairy tale for children, and fairy tales are morality tales of good versus evil, where good is clearly defined, evil is clearly defined, and it's not hard to extrapolate an evil empire with Russia invading a sovereign nation. So it's not surprising, and that's probably what appealed to him about me, is that those movies touch so many people all around the world. I never expected it, A, to have that kind of global appeal, and B, to have lasted as long as it has. But it is a chance to use it for good, and I feel a great responsibility to try and do everything I can to further the Ukrainian cause.
Yeah.
And you won't have any effect. You useless social justice warrior.
Use the Force, Luke. Use the Force, Luke, to figure out what the fuck is really going on.
I've seen this movie before, for Christ's sake. When the neocons first appeared with the Reagan administration in 1980, they went on a major campaign using Star Wars to call Russia the evil empire. That was after 10 years of détente. It was new. And they went on and on about it all through the 1980s. And it was part of the propaganda effort, and partly also sabotage economic stuff, and giving Russia its Vietnam, as Zbigniew Brzezinski explained in Afghanistan, to collapse the USSR.
Yep.
It was the whole shtick. They've done Star Wars comparison to Russia already. You had that play. It's not gonna work again. Now Putin is flipping it and saying, oh, there's an evil empire. Well, let me outline a sketch for you here, and you tell me who is the evil empire, who's the anti-imperialist, and who has always been so. I don't know how much we can give to this, but in the middle of a speech, he also went back and said, the Soviet Union was at the forefront of supporting the anti-colonial movement all through the 20th century. He was saying here, I suppose he was speaking to, reminding Russians that we have always been on the side of good.
Mm-hmm.
If there is a good versus evil, he's saying, yeah, it's not what they're saying. It's the opposite, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. That there's the last one there to have on. I don't know how significant it is, but you can just throw it up, Scotty. It's China in the past few days just announced that it was told its state banks to prepare for a massive dollar dump and a yuan buying spree. China holds quite a lot of dollars, something like maybe somewhere around $1 trillion or 1.2. Maybe it's in the trillions anyway, 1 or 2. Quite a lot of dollars. So I don't know how much they're going to dump, but obviously we'll have to see whether dumping whatever amount they're going to dump has any effect on the currency markets, on the dollar itself.
Things are
nice.
going.
This is something that people have talked about for a long time. You know, China holding all its dollar reserves. Why doesn't it just kind of dump them all? China could take down the dollar overnight if it just dumped all its reserves. Well, that would have an effect on China as well, obviously. So it's not quite so simple, but maybe this is part of it. Just stood out to me as something that as part of Putin's transformation of the global system and stuff. Obviously, that has to be economic, almost at its foundation as well, and culturally and all that kind of stuff, and politically. But it has to be economic, probably first and foremost. In order to be sustainable, it has to be put on a new footing, but obviously not overnight, progressively, right? So this might be one step in that direction. You know, China offloading at least some of its dollars, if it's assuming it's obviously able to. To support its own currency, basically get rid of dollars, buy yuan, buy its own currency.
Yeah, things are haywire in the markets. Obviously, the UK is Bank of England had to intervene last week to prop up the pound, but it's not just there. Everywhere's down except the dollar. The dollar is going up, and what should normally happen to us in the response to this news is the value of the dollar should plummet. Mm-hmm. But they're trying to prop up the dollar. They're trying to prop up the dollar by making the dollar what it always has been, the only safe harbor in a world that's going crazy. Is that Putin's going crazy, and now the Chinese will do something crazy. Come to us, divert. It's all about maintaining global capital flows into Washington and or the city of London. That's what the dollar system, petrodollar system, is about and has been since the 1970s. It's not going to work. Did you hear about Credit Suisse and one of the biggest banks and Deutsche Bank? Rumors are that it's like at Lehman level of catastrophe. Because 2008 was a save. They saved what should have been the beginning of the Great Depression then, but they've staved it off for just over a decade. But that thing has just been put off in the future. That's coming,
I think it's coming in the near future, yeah. Just before I forgot to mention about Mark Hamill there, Luke Skywalker, and his Star Wars reference and good and evil, and that Russia's the example of the evil empire and whatever. George Lucas, is on record as having said that when he wrote Star Wars, the empire was America. It was in the context of the Vietnam War, and the rebels were the Viet Cong.
Right.
So apparently Mark Hamill, who was in the original Star Wars, didn't get that message.
Actors.
Actors.
What they say today may not be. It's a bit like politicians. I found the piece on Sikorsky. What they say today will have no bearing on what they said yesterday.
Yeah.
Let's put this up. June 2014. So Sikorsky, we mentioned earlier, he said, "Thank you, USA," for blowing up NordStream. 2014, he complained.
Just before we go into that question, do you want to just go? I just saw a question there. There's a question there. What is it with the story of the pipeline being impossible to be repaired? I think that's because of the salt water. I think that's propaganda. It can be repaired, like we said. If you look it up, it's something that happens a lot. Okay, the pipelines aren't blown up all the time, but there have been cases where there's a breach in the pipeline, water gets in. It doesn't. If it's left for ages, it'll corrode salt water will corrode the metal in the pipeline. But it can be fixed, and I think it's just propaganda. Because they would like to like part of the idea of blowing up Nord Stream 1 and 2 was that that's it, it's gone forever. And that was part of the propaganda. Okay, it's done. You're never getting this back. It's over. It's gone. But that's not actually the truth. If you look at the actual people who know what they're talking about in terms of pipelines, like, yeah, well, you just go in, you replace those sections and use a pipeline pig, as they call it, pushes the water out, and boom, you're ready to go again.
Like everything else, it comes down to political will. Where there's a will, there's a way.
Exactly.
Yeah. So if
They would-
they tell you they can't fix this because they chose not to.
Right. But go ahead.
Headline from The Guardian citing Reuters 2014, Polish foreign minister, you see, recognize him there, that's Sikorski. Polish foreign minister says his country's alliance with the US is worthless. According to a transcript of recordings obtained by W. Prost, I guess that's a Polish outlet, Sikorski said, we gave the US a blowjob. What was he referring to? Scroll down a bit.
Polish news magazine said on Sunday it obtained a secret recording of Foreign Minister Sikorski contention for a senior European job, saying that Poland's relationship with the United States was worthless. Had no immediate comment. Wow, unless it might have been about some specific. He said, the Polish-US alliance isn't worth anything. It is downright harmful because it creates a false sense of security. Complete bullshit. We'll get in conflict with the Germans, Russians, and we'll think that everything is super because we give the Americans a blowjob. Losers. Complete losers. What a difference 12 years makes. 14 years makes.
Crazy.
But that's true. This is true today as it was back then. But apparently they got used to giving blowjobs to the Americans
and grew to like it.
Grew to like it, yeah. According to the concept, Sikorski described Washington's attitude towards the United States using the Polish word, I'm not going to pronounce that.
Murzin.
Dark-skinned person and someone who does not work for somebody, who does the work for somebody else. So it's some kind of a racial slur. So that's the Poles in the form of slaves, which is what Putin said, right?
Right.
So he was basically saying that we're slaves, prostitutes to America. We do all this work and we get nothing in return. We do what they want and we get nothing in return. They're not providing any security for us. They're simply abusing and using us for their own interests. He said that in 2008, and Putin says today, has it changed? Well, no, because America just blew up Germany's pipeline effectively, and Germany went, thank you, America.
Well, he said that in 2014, 8 years ago.
Oh, sorry, 8 years ago, yeah. So, yeah, and the Germans just suck it up.
What is that power the US has been able to exercise these last couple of decades?
I don't know. Threats.
It's phenomenal. I think Shoigu gave a hint of it in, he not so much a hint about it directly, but he reminded me of the scale of Russia's undertaking here in his interview that was released the same day as one of the speeches by Putin. He was talking about how, look, we're not just up against Ukraine, we're up against NATO. Well, what does that mean? It's the entire military and civilian architecture of an information system. And he talked about 200 civilian satellites, along with 70 military satellites they have at their disposal for surveillance, for targeting, for their war effort in Ukraine.
Yeah, they've sold themselves to America, believe in America's bullshit.
They've turned this planet into a Death Star. Here's a Star Wars analogy. The Americans made this planet into a Death Star. And sooner or later, a Sikorski gets into a position where he sees that and he's like, damn, there's no way, we have no choice. Or so he thinks. But
we've sold ourselves.
To submit they want pedophiles in our schools. All right, whatever you want, America, I'll just sign right here. It's so total.
They obviously
but
believe
that doesn't scare Russians, though.
No, they obviously believed America's lies over the years, America's goodwill and all that kind of stuff, and allowed America leverage over them to the point that they can't do anything now. That if they do anything that displeases America, America can say, listen, do it or else. They have leverage over them that they can, over individuals, over the country, over, in terms of economics and military, options and all that kind of stuff. Cyber options, they probably know, they all know just how screwed they are if they try to turn against their partner. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the only explanation, really, you would assume, unless they've all just lost their minds, like, basically. And they really,
Partly, I think that some kind of transformative, transmarginal effect takes place in their brains as well, where they actually convince themselves that
that it's not
this
the
is
right
what they
thing to do.
politically want.
Yeah.
I mean, he went and married Anne Applebaum.
Yeah.
So he sleeps with one of them. He's not just sleeping with the enemy metaphorically.
Right. Right.
You know,
Yeah. Anyway.
so yeah, the election result in Italy, that's probably a win for Putin.
Meloni. Yeah. We'll see what she does. She has to put up or she's just another.
It's a sign of what's coming in the West, I suppose, I think.
Maybe.
But we're not going to vote our way out of this. It's,
Yeah.
the drama in Iran, was it serious? Brouhaha.
Saudis are happy.
There's-
Americans are happy.
50 people dead, a lot of security people dead. Weapons they found weapons coming in via Azerbaijan. Headline today, 19 killed, including 4 elite IRGC, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps members. 19 killed. And 32 more wounded. An armed attack by separatists on a police station in the southeastern city. So southeast is Balochistan,
Across the borders.
across the border with Afghanistan, Pakistan. No doubt they'll say it was ISIS. No.
Isn't it funny how, like, that happened in Syria as well? In Syria's so-called revolution, in 2011. First of all, you had, like, peaceful protests and some kind of freedom and democracy thing, like as in Iran, women's rights, and that's a real appeal to the West, right? Women taking off their hijabs or not wearing headscarves or whatever, and just letting it all hang out, and that's how it starts. But very quickly, once that's grabbed the headlines, very quickly, you have these weird armed groups coming into the country to support, and they end up being the ones that want to enslave women or something like that.
And cut their heads
And
off. Yeah.
That's what happened in Syria. Like, it was all about freedom and democracy, and then you had these groups come in, and then you had ISIS, basically, right? So it gave rise to ISIS. So it started off as this freedom and democracy movement in Syria, peaceful protests and stuff, and then it was ISIS. And now in Iran, you have, hijab, women grabbing the headlines in the West, and then if the Iranians don't stop it, that's what happens. These groups come across your border, and somebody's funding them, and somebody's training them, train and assist.
Empire of lies, that's how they get you.
Yeah.
Lies, and then once you're open,
And Putin talked
they
about that in
come
his
right
speech.
in and
Yeah.
abuse you.
And Putin talked about that in
upwards.
his speech as well. Not just, and he's obviously referring to Iran, but he's referring to other CSTO regions, like Caucasus region and stuff, the former Soviet republics, the stands. He warned all of them. Listen, you need to be careful. Like, this is what America does. If you want to keep your country, you need to watch out. Yeah. So anyway, that's all the news that's fit to talk about as far as we're concerned over the past week. It's been a fairly momentous week, but not really. Just pushing the dial in a certain direction. People are still waiting for, when's Russia going to go and do shock and awe and just win in Ukraine? Do the winning thing, that we see in the movies where they just win bigly all at once with their awesome weapons. When's that going to happen? Anytime soon?
Maybe.
But like I said, I reckon Russia's won already.
Yeah.
And they could call it a win.
They could, yeah.
They've more to do, but
Yeah.
they got to find some way to end it, though. That's the problem, because the Americans aren't going to stop supplying weapons to the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians are going to they're going to find people from somewhere to keep throwing at the Russians. For maybe the Russians just wait that out until they don't have anybody else to throw at them,
I think
or they decide, listen, this is bullshit. It's going on too long. We're done, and we're going to put an end to it. And they have the means to do that. But
There's so many moving parts. It's not just Ukraine. It's what developments in the West, developments in the markets.
Yeah, of
the
course.
US dollar. What's
well,
going
that's the
on
whole
there.
macro thing. But in terms of the actual military campaign in Ukraine,
Yeah.
what are they going to do? What's the is it a continued kind of relatively slow grind? Letting go of some territory here, getting more here, whatever, until they basically, because they have to at least secure up to the borders. There's 4 regions that they incorporated into the Russian Federation. That's aim number one. That's the first order of business, basically, is pushing Ukrainians out of those regions and securing those borders. After that, who knows? Maybe it'll be a continued fairly slow grind doing that, and then they decide. What Russia does depends a lot on what the West does. So it's effectively unknown.
It's dynamic, so you can't say
there's dynamic narratives about
no.
this whole thing.
Well, this is dynamic reality. When you have partial mobilization, it's real. It's not just a propaganda effort.
Yeah.
But that takes time. Like I said, a lot of them are just they really are going to be on the back line.
Bottom line is NATO's not back. America isn't backing down. America's probably going to up the ante.
They just declared they're going to create a Ukraine command, breaking off from Central Europe command, based in bloody Kiev.
Right.
What that's gearing up for is a direct missile attack on that command center.
On NATO. So
and once you're doing that, you're not at mad yet, but you're at the next level where it we're no longer going to be a covert Moscow type situation. It's more like, we just blew up.
It's open.
This NATO thing. That Russian thing.
We're tired pretending, playing this. Yeah, that wasn't us, and that wasn't you game. At some point, we just get tired. There's no point in playing that game anymore. When that's no longer politically expedient or useful, you just drop it and see where the chips fall.
I think we could be surprised.
We'll see. Anyway, I think we'll leave it there for this week, folks. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, whatever you're doing. And thanks for our chatters. Don't forget to smash all the buttons, the like, and all that kind of stuff, because that's good. We'll be back next week with another show. Until then, whatever's happened between now and then, we'll be keeping an eye on it and letting you know what our take on it is. So until then, have a good week, and Slava
Russia.
See you later. Bye.
See you next week. Bye.
Can't stop the signal now.